with Camel, CXF, FuseService works. Okay, so I just wanted to touch quickly on the difference between the three. I know Derek and I were talking earlier. Other people have come up to me and said, why do we have these products when you may be able to do the same thing with one as well as with the other? The original product roadmap, I can't answer that question, but I can tell you a little bit about how you can choose these for different use cases. And in the future, they may merge a little bit, where it's more of a development platform, where SwitchYard and Camel are running both on Carafe as well as EAP. So AMQ is our message bus. Of course, we can do the integration of applications by notification or exchange of data using multiple protocols. Recently, I've been doing some things on Internet of Things with AMQ. So you guys can check out my blog, and I'm trying to cross-blog between the other TMMs. So if Internet of Things is something that interests you, we're doing some of that as well. At JBoss, we're going to be doing something with Raspberry Pi and AMQ and Fuse. I'm trying to make sure all those get into my blog. So you can search for my name and my blog should come up on Google. Then we have our service bus, Fuse, mediate, transform, and route between loosely coupled components and services using EIP. So Fuse contains AMQ. So the community projects, AMQ is ActiveMQ. Fuse contains ActiveMQ, Camel, CXF, and they run on Carafe as a container. And just a quick note, I'm not sure if it's going to go into 6.1. I think it will be for FuseService works. But SwitchYard should be able to run on Carafe with 6.1. Then we have FuseService works. And so here's where I think some of the issue comes in when we talk about these products. Because now FuseService works contains all the components that Fuse contains. And it contains the governance, orchestration, and the service development. So, does all that make sense, everybody?
Yeah, real quick, can you?
Sure.
So we just purchased the ServiceWorks bundle. That includes AMQ.
Yes.
All of it.
Yep.
I just wanted to
Camel, CXF.
throw that out there for everybody.
It's
the bundle too. So.
And I don't know how they're tracked.
Yeah, it comes with EAP.
Yeah, EAP
comes with
right on top of that.
Yeah, so here you would have EAP, here you would have Carafe.
Mm-hmm.
But when you buy FuseService works, your subscription includes from here below.
Yep.
And I think at some point you'll see some name change as well, where it's more of a development environment, so that you can choose between SwitchYard or Camel, and then choose the container you want to run on. There's a lot of people now, I'm not sure how they're tracking it, because different regions, say EMEA, a lot of people in EMEA like Carafe, like Camel. In North America, people are used to using EAP.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are purchasing FuseService works, but then they may just use Fuse. So I don't know how they're tracking all of that right now.
Is that slide all the way to the right implying that Fuse ESB is running on EAP, or is it just?
No, what it's implying there is Camel is on the EAP.
Okay.
CXF is on EAP.
Okay.
Because you remember, we're talking 6.0 at this point, right? And well, 6.0 here, 6.1 there. So this is EAP, this is Carafe. But in the future, like I say, they'll all kind of meld between containers and whatever technology that you want to use. And I know that's confusing. Hopefully over the next year, they'll alleviate some of that confusion. Because that was one of the main things that I get asked on every meetup, every conference, talking to solutions architects. But one thing I will say is you're concentrating on capabilities then starting on the left, going to the middle, and then on the right, you're increasing capabilities and technology that you can use with different use cases. So really, what it comes down to is more of what does a customer want? What problem are they solving? And at that point, you can decide which technology you're going to use.
Is it more a question of scalability?
No.
No, for us. Yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Just does the code base shift as you move to the right? Or is it just the same?
I think that you could, on FuseService, you could build an application, say in SwitchYard. You should be able to do something similar to Fuse, and you should be able to scale those. I don't think scaling would be impacting with Carafe or PHP. I haven't seen that be an issue.
For us, it was just that we needed the components, right? We didn't need SwitchYard because we had the solar software, right? So for us, it was just about having EAB, Fuse, and everything all in one package so we could just take it, and go.
And I'm not going to go over it here, but if you guys are interested, you can always email me. We're going through a lot right now with Windup. A lot of customers have SOA P5, and so they're asking, how am I going to migrate to FuseService? And Windup does good with some rules, but there's a lot more rules that are needed. So
It's a model that we can customize. Right?
absolutely, and Windup 2.0 should be out in November, and that's supposed to make it easier to write rules. So yeah, hopefully that will be something that gets used over time. Good questions. I like this graphic just to show that the JBoss middleware, you have a lot of different connectivity options, different integration options. I really like JBoss data virtualization, and I've done a lot with it with big data. And so if you haven't checked that out, data virtualization is good at creating unified or aggregated views to different data sources, and then being able to consume it with different options or standards such as JVC, ABC, OData, web services, and so forth. And then we've already talked about FuseService works, service lifecycle management, structured service development, service orchestration, rules processing, and then Fuse below that. Some of the connectivity that I've worked with at really good demos at this point: Salesforce, Twitter, SAP. So with all those middleware products, you can pretty much connect to anything, I think.
Kenny, on that rules processing, we can take it offline, like maybe afterwards, but I got some questions on that later.
Right here?
Yeah.
Sure. Sure.
I was just curious about that. Healthcare, is that the only industry that connects to this?
I don't know what happened to that. No, that's a good point. You weren't supposed to ask that question. Okay. No, it's more of a slide thing than an industry. One of the reasons healthcare was put there with Camel and Fuse. It already has that HL7 connector, and it uses Happy API to do a lot with HL7. And so we had been doing a lot with HL7 with transmitting data. I think that's how I ended up there. It wasn't that was the only one. But that was highlighted. How about that? Okay, so as we mentioned before, when you look at FuseService works, you have the Apache Camel, SwitchYard, Overlord, the community projects. And down below there, of course, are DT.gov. One question I had for you guys, just to kind of discuss this a little bit, whether you're a user of the products or trying to sell it, I like DTGov, and that's one of the things that we're trying to give some examples with Docker using different environments, because the workflow that comes with FuseService Works goes dev, QA, staging, production. So DTGov is good at taking that application and letting you move it through the workflow. So Docker is a really good example of setting up these 4 different environments and having DTGov go through that workflow. So you claim a task when it gets into dev, say somebody tests it, passes it, and then it goes to the next environment. But I'm curious if anybody has looked at using DTGov or has used DTGov to move applications to deployments to different environments. Does anybody use DTGov? Looked at DTGov? No? Okay. We'll kind of go through that a little bit, but I was just curious. And then RTGov, with the new version that'll be coming out, it'll be using Elasticsearch, and it'll be using Kibana, yeah, for the dashboard. It won't use the gadget server that it has now.
Yeah, sorry.
All these laptops are warm.
You want a beer?
Make it warmer.
Okay, so when we go on to SwitchYard, we'll speed it up a little bit. So everybody have their laptop. I was hoping everybody could try out Docker with FuseService Works. We'll have to see how that goes. So SwitchYard, service component architecture based for structured service development. Design, code, test at higher service abstraction. So if you'll notice that diagram that shows here, when you go into JBoss Developer Studio, you're working on a canvas with your services. And this is the one that is deployed into the Docker container that I'm going to show you. And then store and reuse business services, shared repository, easily called BPMN-based BPM processes, and then the visual tooling. But when we go into, when I show you that application in JBoss, for this application we have test cases, so that when you're going and building this application, you have a base that you start with, and then the lab walks you through all the way to the end. There are test cases that you run at each step to show success or not. And so I'm going to show you the end product. You can actually go down the lab and walk through creating and updating all these components. So design time governance. So it uses SRAMP for service component and artifact registry, and it requires SRAMP or a SRAMP. So when you build an application in JBoss and you deploy it to DTGov, it has a workflow associated, whether it's SwitchYard or whatever. It'll kick off that workflow so that you can move through the different environments. So Docker is a great use for testing DTGov. So then we store, share services, policies across teams, our team notification on content changes. So what happens is it's role-based. So whenever an application goes in under design time governance, and I'll show you, gets into dev, which is the first part of the workflow, and you can change the workflow, but that's the default one. When that person passes it, it moves on to the next stage, and it'll do the team notifications. You can track and visualize artifact relationships, impact the discovery and analysis, and it has the web-based tool that you'll see and CLI tools to do the search and reporting. So all your artifacts within the deployment show up and can be searched within the repository. Am I putting everybody to sleep? I hope not. Go ahead and turn the game back on. More beer for the shots. So runtime governance, like I said, in 6, it's the gadget server, and situation, service overview, and response times. And with the new version, it's based on Elasticsearch and Kibana. So we can grow service quality, Realize IT agility, increase operational visibility, and understand and measure operational efficiency. So you can set up the service level agreements and monitor your services. So I wanted to go over a little bit about what Red Hat's doing with Docker. If you go out to jboss.org, because I know everybody has an account, right? Go out to jboss.org. There's a microsite that Merrick just built on Docker. It's jboss.org/Docker. And if you go there, you'll see a list of Docker images down below, like Wildfly and so forth. You can grab those images and start working with them immediately. Also has a link over to the repo somewhere, GitHub repository, which should be this. So you can actually see the Docker file, build files, that exist for each of these images. And if you'll watch that page, he's putting out blogs, videos, more people are contributing. So if you're interested in Docker with community projects, this would have everything that you need to get started. Merrick's leading that with Red Hat. Now that's the Docker images, Docker files for community projects. With Docker itself, RHEL 7 does include Docker and can run the Docker containers. The JBoss products, which is what I deal with, FuseService, Workstate, Virtualization. Right now, we're trying to determine the best way to maintain product images in Docker. Because once you start putting products into something like that, you have to maintain and support it. So right now, they're trying to determine which group is going to be responsible for building, testing, maintaining Docker images with middleware products. So that may be a little while before you see something out from Red Hat that says, as a customer, you can buy a subscription, and that subscription includes a Docker image with FuseService Works. But you can go build your own. It just requires you to go to jboss.org, download the JBoss product, put it in a directory, and the Docker file builds the image, and you can start the container. Does all that make sense to everybody? So right now, there's no subscription for a middleware product Docker image. So overview of Docker. So we're going to go through this. We're going to go through some Docker testing, if you want to try it on your laptop. Then we're going to go through the overview of the FuseService Works Docker file that I have, and I'll show you how the build takes place and how you can work with the application.
Are the JBoss Docker images, are they located on Docker.io or?
They're on a GitHub account with you guys, right?
Well, so the GitHub repo should have the Docker file, and it does the build, but it should be putting it out under hub.docker.com when it does the automated build. So the image itself is ending up out on Docker, the Docker registry.
The Docker.
Yeah, I believe that docker.com is Docker.io.
Yes.
So what happens, here we have the images. I think those images on jboss.org are pointing over to hub.docker.com/jboss. And then when you look at the GitHub repo, those are just the Docker files, and the automated build builds those images and pushes them out. Does that make sense to everybody? And so if you go out there right now, we don't have SwitchYard and Overlord as a community image, but there are some consultants over in EMEA that are working on that. And I was talking with them last week about that. So that should be out there soon too. So even though there's not a FuseService Works product image, you can still go get the community soon.
And you said nothing with EAP either, right?
Correct. There's just Wildfly. Now that doesn't mean that you can't build it, right? I'm going to show you how to build it, but the image itself, it's not.
Now, will Red Hat technical support still support me if I create a Docker image, or?
I did not think they were, but unless somebody else has heard differently.
Not yet, no, I don't
Or
think
do I
so.
just lie and not say anything?
Right. No, so my understanding at this point, because at first, I got in trouble actually. At first, I created a FuseService Docker image, and I put it out on Docker registry. That means that people didn't have to go to JBoss.org and download the project. They could just go grab the image. Oopsies, that's what I said too.
Probably word for word. I know,
So-
word for word.
So, yeah. So they said right now we're not doing anything with a product Docker image because we don't know who's going to build it, who's going to support it, who's going to test it. So with that response from them, I wouldn't think that Red Hat would support it on Docker. But I mean, they're.
It's coming. I know that they're working on some. I don't think they've fully figured out how to play together yet. But it's because we're a Docker partner, and there's the whole Red Hat, story of who's going to support it, the container itself. So it's just to be determined. But if you're talking about your FuseService subscription, if you guys deploy it in there, are they going to you call in for support, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think it's still kind of a gray area.
Yeah. So when you go look at the support page, I can't remember where it is, but it tells you the supported environments where you can run EAP or FuseService or data virtualization, or Fuse. It tells you what environments, platforms they support. And I don't think any of that's been updated with Docker. But that's a good question. So yeah, I had to quickly take that down. So
Did you have any trouble taking it down?
no.
Because I put stuff on Docker before, and don't they check to see if anybody else is using your images?
Some people had downloaded it already, so I don't know. I was able to get on there and delete it unless it last 2 minutes. Still
It's still out there. You keep referencing.
Yeah.
Shit.
So Jim's going to get some message. Yeah, we love that you put that image out there for free. We don't need a subscription. But I mean, really, the subscriptions are more open source companies. That's not sure should be helpful. So anyway, so good stuff. Overview of Docker. So who's used Docker? Hey, Docker fun. I really like it a lot. So I'm going to tell you my experiences on Docker. So if anybody has any other experiences and have done more with it, then feel free to speak up and say if you've had similar experiences or different. But I'm going to concentrate on what I've done with the middleware products for Red Hat. We have a data virtualization workshop and a FuseService workshop out on GitHub, and I've used them both with Docker. So other than that, I haven't used Docker in other environments extensively. So of course with Docker we have our Docker engine, and we have our Docker Hub that we were talking about. And with the Docker engine, when you install Docker, that's a daemon running, and you have your Docker client API set that you're using to communicate with the engine. So I condensed like 10 slides down into this one because some of the other slides start going through, these shipping containers and a history of why shipping containers started and all, but I don't think we need to go through all that. We can just say, as a developer, we want to build once, run anywhere, and make it portable, right? If I build an application, instead of writing some instructions, and I came from development, developers hate instructions anyway. They don't want to write documentation.
That's true.
So with developers now, build my container, I can give it to somebody else. I can do the export, if somebody have tar image, they can just run off with my container, and it should work the same way on their machine it did mine. It shouldn't be, well, it worked on localhost. So then DevOps, they should be able to configure once and run anytime. So the big thing here, lightweight, portable, self-sufficient, and had a discussion the other day with someone about, well, with the data virtualization, for example, I could put the data virtualization server with EAP, I could put MySQL, Postgres, MongoDB, all within one container. That's not the way Docker was intended. It was intended one process per container. So in that case, you should have data virtualization server, a MySQL container, MongoDB container, Postgres container, Hadoop container, whatever. And so that they're all connected, and whereas you can, if you're building these things, you can later.
Yeah, Kenny, I just thought about this. Previously I've built Docker containers out, but I've never tried to work with trying to look into grouping containers, where you can say, hey, just as you're describing, you have a different container for each. These containers can come in a container grouping where you get 5 containers and they all interchangeably work together. Has Docker looked at doing that yet or not?
I haven't tried that. In other words, the images that I've created, for instance, the one that I was describing, or even the DT-Gov one, I built the containers and made sure that they were sure, right? But I haven't done any kind of grouping. Has anybody else had any experience with grouping?
No, I haven't tried it, but high-level reading about Fig, the company Docker just acquired.
Oh,
that's
okay.
what I think that's intended for.
Okay.
I think it's,
And they bought Fig and one other company at the same time.
I mean, that would push their model though, right?
Right.
Like if it's about keeping one service per container, you're very rarely going to hand out one service. You're going to want to hand out a few services. So it's going to be like 5 containers. I want to have them pre-built.
so you create a config file that describes your deployment.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it was part of Orchard. I think it was.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, you could cluster your containers with Puppet modules and then Puppet push all.
I could be completely wrong, but I thought that's what Fig was intended for.
Good orchestration, yeah.
And, so an engine that enables any payload to be encapsulated as a lightweight, portable, self-sufficient container that can be manipulated using standard operations and run consistently on virtually any hardware platform. That's what we want, right? So container versus VM. I don't know that I really need to go through this. Everybody understands the reason we're moving from a VM to a container, right? So, well, VM over on the left, it shows our hypervisor and all of our guest OSs. Over on the right, it's showing container with our apps and binaries and those on the host OS. So containers are isolated but share OS kernel where appropriate bins, binaries, and libraries. And one thing I wanted to mention, this came up at Summit. Does anybody here go to Summit, Red Hat Summit? They were talking about microservices. There's a lot of discussion of microservices. And I think that's what Docker is going to help people to do. So, I know you don't want me to sit here and read all that. Reason I put this in there, out on speakerdeck.com/kpeoples, and I put it at the meetup, I put all these slides out there. And so all these instructions, if we don't get time to go through actually on your laptop, then you can go out and grab the slide deck, and that should enable you to get started. And also, some of this text like this, you can go back and read it. But I do think that this gave a good comparison with shipping containers and features. So really on the left-hand side, this describes Docker real well. Content agnostic, hardware agnostic, content isolation and interaction, automation, highly efficient separation of duties. So if somebody asks you more about Docker, if you said those, then that should pretty much highlight why you want to use Docker. And so with Docker container lifecycle, we're going to go through some of these commands. There are a lot of commands with Docker. When you go out to Docker.io, they have some good documentation, but I found some additional ones that I included in references at the end of the presentation. there's like a very long tutorial. I think it was 100 and something pages. And then there's a guidebook that's free. I can't remember the guy's name, but he just did a Docker book, but he's charging for that. Do you know his name?
No, one second here.
Yeah. He, I think he's one of the guys that work at Docker, but he did a Docker book, but he charges for it.
James Turnbull.
Yeah, Turnbull. He did a Docker book that you can go download, but I found the two references. I put at the end of the presentation. They were pretty good. It's a long tutorial and a guidebook. So just to highlight here, when you think about a Docker container, you can build an image from a Docker file, run a container, commit a container to a new image, run a new container from an image, kill a running container, start a stop container, remove a stop container, remove an image. So that's kind of a life cycle if you want to think of the different stages of a Docker container and the commands that are associated. So each of those are commands: to build, run, commit, kill, start, RM, RMI.
Is it cloud code? If you got container that's misbehaving.
So the question is, does it auto kill? I think it depends on what is happening with the auto kill. I think it depends on what's happening with the container. When you're trying to start it and it's executing that command, I think what I've noticed when it's executing that command, that it does receive some kind of error or stop. I don't know if anybody has seen any other experiences there. Yeah, so I would have to look closer at that to see under what circumstances we'll do that. And we'll look at the Docker file a little bit closer. Of course, we want to create, manage, and deploy code, and that's a good representation of showing what happens with the build, to push, to search, pull, and run. We're going to hit some more topics in a minute. You can go back to the presentation and reference that. Just quick terminology. I'm kind of running through these so we can get to it. So image, an image is a read-only layer used to build a container. The container is a self-contained runtime environment. The index and registry, there are public and private servers like Hub on Docker, where people can upload their repositories so they can easily share the images. And then we have the repository, the group of images located in the Docker registry. So I put just a couple of quick notes here. The difference between the containers and images, because a lot of people, and sometimes I do this by accident, intermingle container and image. I should be saying image, say container. Sometimes I'm guilty of that. But this is a good guide to keep in mind here. So containers represent an encapsulated set of processes based on an image. You can spawn them with the Docker run command. And images are like templates or stencils that you can create containers from.
You can create an image from a running container.
You can create an image from a running container. I haven't done that, but normally it's the other way around, right? You create the image and then you run the container.
You can do a commit, then.
Say that again?
I think you could do a Docker commit of a running container and save it off as a new.
Right, you could download a whole bunch of stuff.
Inside that container.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. And then,
Oh, okay.
You just save it off as an
Do
image.
the commit
Yeah.
so somebody else can pull it down?
Right.
yes.
Yes.
But it's better to use the Docker file if you can.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, scripting it versus.
Yeah, reproducible versus.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I would like to see a good document that describes best practices,
Yeah.
guidelines, but the problem with that is it's so many.
Yeah.
You're seeing a lot of updates that are occurring, a lot of changes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Let me get this straight. You're saying it's better to just get the instructions to build a container and build it yourself than to pull one
To
off.
build an image, to create your Docker file that says apt-get nano, apt-get Java JDK, versus to spin up an empty Ubuntu container, SSH into there, and then run all those commands inside there, and then commit it. And you can commit it, and you'll save it, and you'll have the same thing essentially, but it's harder to reproduce the latter.
absolutely. So, and this is just the way I've been doing it. Doesn't mean that it's kind of the way you describe it. That's why I had started off before I put the image out there in the registry. I started off where, in the README, so people go download the product from JBoss.org, put it in software, and run the Docker file. And I think that's easier than what we were just describing here, which is, okay, I want to create the image. I have this container. I'll make some changes like SSH to it or do whatever, and then I'm going to commit it, and somebody else is going to pull it or I'll pull it. I think it's easier to go run the Docker file and do the build, and with the caching, let's say you change the Docker file, it's going to skip all the prior steps that it already did for the Docker build and go to the last one that it can. So the way I've done it, other than when I push that one up there, I just use the Docker file and create an image. Right.
Have you versioned the Docker files? Like create different tags?
Yes. Well, so I create my tags like kpeople / JBoss FSW, and that's the way I do it. But I haven't been trying to do a lot of versioning where, okay, this is version 1. Kind of what Merrick's doing, right? Merrick has a repository and he's making changes. He has an automated build that's doing the build of the image and then it's pushing it out to Docker Hub. I haven't been doing all of that. So you can go out on jboss.org and see how Merrick's doing that. And so that's what you're talking about, right? Because when we talk about tags, I'm tagging kpeople / JBoss FSW. But when we talk versioning, you could be talking about the version of the image that was built from the Docker file. So when you say versioning, which are you meaning?
Well, I mean, let's say you had an image and you were happy with it, but you wanted to make a change. And you push that image back into Docker IO. Does it overwrite the existing image, or is it going to create a new version of it?
I thought it overwrote it, but you could go back and look at different versions, but I have not been doing that.
Okay.
Like I say, since doing middleware products, there's not a flow to that to do it.
Okay.
So that would be something that I would have to find out. But I think the way Merrick's doing it, and I keep going back to him because for Red Hat, he's probably the most experienced. Because right now he's getting the community, I think there's 4 of them. It's Keycloak, Wildfly. It seems like there were multiple community images that he's been doing. And he'll put the Docker file up in GitHub, he'll do the auto build, and that image will go into Docker Hub. So then when he does another change, and that's committed, you still are accessing the image, I believe, through the same tag. But I think you can go back and look at the different versions. I would have to go and look at his registry.
Yeah,
You could use his as a guide.
It seems like a lot of guys are using, GitHub to put the Docker files,
Yes.
and then they're pushing that file as a script into Docker IO.
Well, right, so there's 2 things. Over in Docker IO, it should point to the original Docker file, but it should also have the image.
Okay. Right. I mean, from what I remember, it seemed like Docker IO was pointing back to GitHub.
Probably for the Docker file.
Right,
but
exactly.
Not for the image.
Mhm.
I see. No, right, there's no binaries on it.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have your versioning there, and that's why it's kind of.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why it's easier to version a
Yeah.
Docker file and
Yeah.
cheaper.
Right.
As small as these images are.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
Right. And so when I was doing my testing, I was doing locally, right? Docker file, doing the build. Finally, I did a place that I could put some. And at that point, you can like point your Docker build to that GitHub repo, and it'll grab the Docker file and start doing the build.
Right, and my experience has been when you do the push on the image at the end, it seems to overwrite it. Does that make sense?
Right. It overwrites the image
On like Docker
on
Hub.
Docker Hub.
Right, Docker Hub. Okay.
Yep. As far as I know, yes, and I haven't looked to see. There's an easy way to look at those different versions of the images, because I haven't gone down that path yet. But yeah, that definitely would be good to know. So with the people that have used Docker, I haven't seen it in production. Somebody told me that they were putting it into production, but I haven't. Is anybody
One
seen Docker
example
in
of it-
production?
One example of it being in production is Google right now. Google's
Right.
entire infrastructure right now is built on Docker containers. Gmail,
Is it?
Google Drive,
Okay.
all of that is in Docker containers right now.
What's that?
They have
use?
their own version of Kubernetes, which they're
Yeah.
using internally for orchestration, but Kubernetes is being made as like a derivative of what they've done internally. So it'll be more platform agnostic. Okay, so.
I think that music, was it Spotify? Is that right?
Yeah,
They're all-
they're also all on Docker containers. I think Netflix also might be living on Docker
Now,
containers.
did any of these companies reduce their footprint? Because I know, obviously, these are companies with like large server farms.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure Google had its reasons for what it did, but they haven't disclosed. Like, we reduced our infrastructure by this much because it's Google.
Well, I would just be kind of curious for, companies that large, have they saw IT overhead just drop quite a bit?
Sure, yeah.
Well, like we were talking about earlier, that's a good point, and that when we talk about OpenShift, it does good auto scaling, right?
elastically, like scaling upwards and then plugging stuff back down.
So we're talking about Docker. How well does it do that? Because in order to improve that footprint, it's got to scale properly.
That's what Kubernetes is supposed to do when it's fully vetted and fully completed with orchestration. It's supposed to allow containers to elastically scale based on need.
So
in
OpenShift
part.
is switching to Docker.
No, that's a touchy subject, not switching.
Well, the cartridge becomes the container.
Yeah, a container can live within inside a cartridge, so you can say, for my cartridge, I want Docker to live inside of it, and then you can run any container.
Containers in the cartridge?
Too much convergence going on.
But that's
where it is right now.
That's OpenShift 3, though. That's
Yes.
next year. Right
Now-
now, OpenShift 2.
The benefit, though, of running OpenShift, or Docker and OpenShift, rather than just running Docker by itself, is currently Dockers have been security vetted out, so no one knows, like, what's the weaknesses from a security standpoint using it. Is there going to be data leakage problems, kernel vulnerabilities, things like that. But OpenShift surrounds its C groups with SE Linux environments, so each has its own SE Linux policy that segments itself away from another gear. So when you're living with a Docker container inside of an OpenShift gear, you now have SE Linux wrapped around it as well, and it's automated, so you're not writing policies by hand.
I think they stole that.
That's what I figured they wouldn't allow it. Right? It's a direct
It is.
competition.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting here listening to this.
Well-
That's what OpenShift.
Well, I mean, it should be a direct competition. The reason why it's not is currently because Docker isn't a platform as a service yet. OpenShift allows itself to scale. When Docker gets to that point with Kubernetes,
It's
then
coming.
it's going to be a competitor unless they completely meld together.
Or Red Hat buys it.
Or Red Hat, yeah, one of the two.
So now, what is that
Project Atomic, it's a very, very, very small version of RHEL that has pretty much nothing on it except what's required of Docker.
It's like a core OS, like a real lightweight Linux distribution made for containers.
Yeah.
Project Atomic.
The New York Stock Exchange.
Is it? I don't know.
I didn't know.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Google's been just dumping money into
Yeah.
it every chance they get. There's another two, I think, big name companies that are dumping money into it too. So.
Yeah, the other day I saw something that said Docker is not a PaaS.
Yeah, it's not.
And exactly. So until it says Docker is a PaaS, then I don't think Red Hat will have any issues.
So is there any governance around Docker at all then, or?
When you say
Governance, yeah, what do you mean exactly?
So like, I have to be authenticated to go pull down images from a repository, stuff like that.
That's a good question, but it depends. Like Docker Hub, right? You can sign up for it. You can put an image out there, and Red Hat's trying to get their own external registry.
Yeah, that's true. You can inherit from other people's images.
Yes.
So his image could have a virus, right?
Yeah, well, so here's the other thing too. So Google App Engine, for instance, is built on Docker containers, right? Do you know what Google App Engine is? It's their platform as a service. Yes. So Google App Engine, in order for you to submit code that's going to live inside of Google App Engine, they have security engineers at Google that review your source code and test it to make sure that it but
so like an iPhone app.
Well, you would drop an iPhone app inside of it.
But I mean, they vet those.
Yeah, they vet, like if you drop a REST web service into a Google App Engine container, they're going to vet it before they allow it to exist. Now, on top of that, though, here's the other thing. Instead of just allowing your container to live in their hosted environment, in Google's App Engine, every container lives inside of its own VM. So they have a VM that's living around the container. We just found this out. We went to Google's, what was the name of the conference we went to for
It
Google?
was just their Google Cloud platform for developers.
So internally, Google is all on containers without VMs, but their App Engine, every container is wrapped in a VM because they're afraid for data leakage.
I would find it. I would find it very hard for one company to take on a governance within Docker, like from all the different.
Well,
The reason why it takes away from this, totally true, performance reasons.
Yeah.
But what it doesn't take away from is standardized operating environments. When you're building code, you don't have to worry about where it's getting deployed, and that's where they're really leveraging it. Plus, when it gets to a point that Docker is really vetted from a security standpoint and they can rely on it, they can remove VMs and just start dropping them on the host, and no one will know the difference.
Google ships something like 1 billion containers a week.
Yes, that's literally what they told us when we were
Yeah.
A week.
A week.
1 billion a week. And that's not including just their internal. That's their internal and their external Google App.
That's amazing.
That's why they had that big barge out on the.
Yeah.
One other thing, real quick, besides viruses, the other sticky subject is unlicensed applications putting out there. So it's a whole other.
Yeah, that's another problem.
And,
But
we came from security.
yeah, exactly.
DoD and IC. I saw a real good presentation the other day. Can't remember his name, but he was concentrating on security for Docker. So I'm interested to see, how that's going to play out, especially around government.
Yep.
So let's keep going. Image namespaces, root lights, CentOS, user training / Docker fundamentals image, self-hosted on a registry. And we have our Docker architecture. Docker is client server. We have Docker daemon, which is a Docker server, receives and processes incoming Docker API requests. The Docker client, which is the command line tool, and talks to the Docker daemon. Then we have our Docker Hub registry, the public image registry that we were talking about. I don't know if you guys want to jump on and try and do the install of Docker. You can refer back to this presentation for speakerdeck.com/kpeoples, and you can kind of go through that later on if you want. But I'm just going to kind of go through these quickly. So installing Docker on your Linux distribution, installing on OS X and Windows. If you go to docker.io, there's documentation that pertains to each platform so that you can get it installed and get it running. So getting started, you do the install, then you're going to start the daemon, and then you can do Docker info or Docker version, which I have the screenshot there to see if it actually installed properly and the daemon is running. There's a typo. So I was talking to Derek about this earlier, and he didn't have to do this, but I did on a Fedora, on a Fedora platform, and I saw some other people had trouble like this. If you do, I had to go and change permissions on var, not root, but run.
Yeah.
/var/run/docker.sock. If there's a permission error, then you can change that var run docker.sock to get past that permission here.
Recommend run it in either CentOS 7, the latest version of Fedora, or Ubuntu, or use boot Docker on Windows and Mac.
So the first example, and you don't have to install anything additional. Once you install Docker, you can go do the Docker run base here, or the Docker run busybox. And what it's doing is it's running this image and doing an echo of hello world. So it's just running that container and running that command.
So when I first downloaded Docker maybe 5 or 6 months ago, it was a lot more difficult. It seems like the commands.
Oh, they've gotten a lot
Oh,
easier
yeah.
to use.
So
I think they're at 0.13.
Yeah, 1.13.
And then my version here, it's running, it's needing me to run sudo with every command. Does the newer version not need that anymore?
The version I was running, I don't have to run.
Okay.
Yeah.
You do for the
You
daemon.
shouldn't, but yeah, the daemon that the actual service is going to need to run, but the command should need.
Okay.
All right, so if you'll look up here, see at the dollar, I'm running Docker run.
Yeah, I see.
Well, what did Docker do when I did that? It has the 10 steps there. Generate a new container, create a new file system, mount, read, write layer, allocate network interface, set up IP, set up netting, execute the process in the container, capture its output, turn it to the screen, and stop the container. And that was like 1 second. Very powerful.
Try to say it's fast. It's fast.
I can do that on a VM.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then what I did, I took this from one of those tutorials in the references, and I added a couple of slides because when you do Docker run and or Docker build and then Docker run and you run this container, you're going to want to interact with it some, right? You're going to want to see what's going on. So I put a couple of commands in here and showed the output so you could actually see what's going on. So when I do the Docker build and I have my image, you can do Docker images and see those images. If you want to see the container that's run, you can do, when you do Docker run, you can do a Docker PS. And then also, if you want to keep it running in the background and print hello world every second, then it's showing you in this command what would have to be done once you run that container, what command to execute to keep that going. And then it should be log files, yeah. So in this examining the commands, it shows you how to do Docker logs to see the log files from that container. And then you can also attach to it. You can also stop it, and you can show the container list. And then you can also get the IP address with Docker inspect. So this is a good example. When you do the Docker build file for FuseService, if FuseService is running, you're going to want to browse and look at the management console or DTGov, RTGov, SRAM. So you do the Docker inspect, you get the IP address, and then you can browse to FuseService within that container. Now in the Docker build, I'm actually adding the home loan application through the Docker build. But since you have access to the management console, you could actually just deploy the home loan outside of the Docker build. So then this is just describing an implicit and explicit download. Because what will happen if you run that base, it's not in your local repository, so it's going to go grab it from Docker Hub and download it. So starting over, these are some good commands if you want to, if you've been messing around all day. Sometimes I do. I want to stop my containers and remove the containers and remove the images. Those are good commands just to wipe everything out.
Do you have any advice as far as when you want to attach to a running container to get into that container's shell?
So of course it has to have SSH daemon running, right?
Yeah. The container?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I had somebody the other day tell me, Once that container's running, you shouldn't have to get into it and make any changes. So you shouldn't have that running.
Okay.
The alternative is NSN, where there's a way you if you go on the Docker's website, and you just get the process ID, and you can enter without SSH. But again,
Okay, see, I haven't done, and that's the thing. So the question would be not whether you can get into it.
Why do you
Well,
need
exactly. But once you create it, should you be changing the build file, rebuilding the image, or should you be connecting to the inside of it and making changes?
Okay.
Depends on what you.
Yeah.
It depends on what you're doing.
Right, because in theory, if you have to go inside that it's not version for a different, for the next release or whatever.
Then you shut it down and.
Well, and what happens if you target and give that to somebody else and you go in and change it and they say now,
right,
or let's say the other way, you give it to them after it's changed and something's broken, and you tell them go download the image that works.
Right.
So yeah, so versioning is, so you can get into a lot of different.
Theory is great, but I still want to be able to get in and, you know.
I think that's a developer thing, right?
Yeah, you need to debug and.
You developer, do you do a lot of development? Yeah. At least with me, I want to get in and I want to SSH to something, get command line and do any changes.
Yeah, right.
And so that's what I'm used to doing. But I think with Docker, it's trying to change that mindset.
So do you have to run like the bin bash as the command?
No, you.
Yeah, what I've done is the attach. So
or the attach to it.
If he's done something else, that would be good to maybe post on the meetup too.
Yeah.
Because when you attach to that example, you're actually watching the log file, right? Or the standard out.
Right, but you can also attach with the bash shell, right?
Okay. So can you attach to anything?
But that does let you get a shell, right? Not doing the SSH, getting a shell and connecting your in there. But again, you have to look at why you might be doing it. I think that's what you were talking about, looking up, like instead of SSH,
trying to find that simple documentation.
Right, you get the container ID, and then you're
no, it's not
attaching
attach.
to it.
It's
Is it a run with the bash shell? Something like that, but that would be good to post on the meetup. Everybody can grab that. I have, let's see, did I? Oh, I think it's down here. So look and see if this, look and see here, here it is. So you should be able to spin up a shell, you should be able to do that and connect to it.
Is this going to kill the wireless if we all do it?
I don't know, Eric, is it going to kill the?
I think we are.
We've done some fun on that, we'll see.
This isn't any more people than we normally have on our network at a given time.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how big this image is.
And I think
so.
it's this.
But see, you should be able to do.
I think it's that bin bash at the very end that's
Yes.
giving you
Yes.
the command line.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So was this what you were talking about, or are you talking about something?
no, something different.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you do that, because then you're bypassing the command you give it in the Docker file.
Yes.
You're not running what the
Yeah.
image was intended to run.
Right. Okay.
Right.
I
So
don't know why I'm having such a.
how am I doing on time?
We're at 8 o'clock. We're over 8.
So is everybody all right if I keep going and just talk a little bit, and then we'll stop in like 5-10 minutes?
Sure.
Everybody all right with that? All right. Are you getting tired of me? Everybody wants to see a football game. So
Just you.
is it me?
No, I
don't want to see
do.
the football game. Oh, I'm the only one who wants to see it. So you can do some changes in Docker config to affect Docker. I have been just using the default. If you want to look at the parameters, you can go to docker.io. And that's Docker Hub. Of course, you can push your images out there. But if you notice, even when I pulled that base image, it does have the activity feed for my account out there. All right, so you can go back and look at some of this, but this is going through what happens on the Docker file. Remember, is our build for our image. So they're executed in order. Each instruction creates a layer. Instructions are cached unless you set it not to cache. The from instruction must be first non-comment instruction. Line starting with pound are treated as comments. You can only have one command, one entry point. So our Docker file, what I've done is updated with the home loan application. This repository, JBoss Docker files, FSW 600 base. So what you can do is install Docker, download FuseService from jboss.org, and put the downloaded file into software directory. And then at that point, all you have to do is Docker build. When it's complete, you'll have a FSW container that you can connect to and test with. You can come back and look at these build command highlights that talk about the Docker file, which is located at FSW 600 base. These are some commands. This is assuming, I think actually on the GitHub repo it tells you this, but if you clone that repo, the FSW 600 base, if you clone it and put the product installer into software, then you can start with this command. But if you didn't have to download that software and put it in the software directory, you would be able to do the build off of the GitHub repo. The reason it's not doing that is you have to download the product and put it in software.
Hey, can you go back to the Docker files link from JBoss? There you go.
And I updated this earlier, and I've done testing, and everything's working fine on mine. So if you have any issues trying this, then please feel free to email me or make a comment on the repo. I'll be glad to help. Are you getting to it? Okay.
So I'm new to JBoss. What tutorial would you recommend after I get it installed using Docker? Right, so what should I go through to have some fun?
So you're new to FuseService?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I want to find some. Actually, I want to learn Docker. But
okay.
Docker is like a solution waiting for a problem, right? So
if you want to learn,
two birds.
Yep, this should help you kill two birds, and you can let me know. Send me an email. If you go to this O'Reilly link, this is on references. This is the last page.
Okay.
That O'Reilly static asset, this introduction to Docker, that's the one that I was talking about. That's like over 100 pages, and it goes step by step what Docker is, how to use it, a lot of the commands, layering. It goes through adding software into the container. There's a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
So, and also this top one is a guidebook for Docker. If you go through those two things, I think you'll know everything you want to know about Docker.
Yeah, but I want a problem to solve while I'm learning Docker, or some software to run inside of it that I can also learn, because otherwise I'm just building containers and looking at them.
So my opinion, and
what would be a good thing to do?
Right. So if anybody else has a good example they want to share, then we should do that. What I've done, this is a good example because at Summit 2014, Red Hat Summit 2014, the use case there was Keith Badlow, who is the SwitchYard lead engineer, project manager for that community project. SwitchYard is within FuseService, right? This is SwitchYard. You're building your application, you're deploying it into FuseService. So we were doing this lab, and I'll go through that in a second. But in order to set up the environment for all the attendees, and there were probably 60, in order to set up that environment, just to go through that lab, Keith and I spent, I don't know, weeks beforehand with the infrastructure team for Red Hat Summit with all the other people that were doing workshops, setting up virtual machines for each lab, setting up users, doing everything that they needed, that we needed to have done, and doing all the testing. So there was a lot of man hours, a lot of time, a lot of money wasted creating this infrastructure, shipping off these servers to San Francisco in order just to run this lab, so that when the attendees came in and sat down at a machine, they had FuseService works with JBoss Developer Studio ready to go. And so with Docker, now we have the build file, right here. With FuseService works. Now I've built my container. Now I can go through this, which is a lab that has a starting point, to show how to build a SwitchYard application for FuseService works. Goes through all these steps, which ends up building this application. That lab jar that is the final deliverable or final artifact, that can be deployed into the container that you've built with Docker. So that's a good use case of showing here's an easy way to create a container with a product in it and an application, and somebody can do this on their own, and it'll be real quick for Red Hat Summit Lab for setting that up, or compared to what Keith and I went to last year. It was a lot of time and effort just to set that up. So in my opinion, that's a good example. Now, I don't know if does anybody else have any examples they would like to share?
Not for FuseService work specifically, there's example things that are for test runs with Docker that you can find. But there's very minimal stuff on the FuseService with Docker, which is why this is important.
Yeah. And so this
Answered my question.
Okay. So here our Docker file. You can go take a look at it. You can build it. You can run it. Docker UI. So how many? I think there was probably half of us that use Docker. Docker UI is a good user interface for looking at containers, for starting them, stopping them. So I would look at Docker UI if you want a management tool for your Docker images and containers.
Is that pretty good?
I don't know how. I didn't look. I've tested it. I've used it.
It's been around. It's just getting better now, right? In recent months, it's gotten more fine-tuned. It's easier to interface with. Before it was there, and it was just not good.
But it's 3 steps. I mean,
Yeah,
very
It's
easy.
open source as well.
Yes.
Yes.
3 steps, and you can manage your containers really nice. And then, like I said, that homeowner application, the jar that is included in the FSW 600, that's the jar that you get when you go through these steps. You can also test DTGov and RTGov through that lab. And then references, and voila, we're done.
Oh, football game.
What are we winning?
So thanks everybody, I
Yes,
appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Hopefully, I can see it out on the meetup now. Kenny did okay, but man, that game was really good.
Funny you should say that.
There it was, damn.
Did I miss it?
That's probably their PlayStation.
There you go. There you go. Go back one, Ken. There you go.
So it looks like I don't have to use sudo anymore. I've been doing the.
I forgot you had
Oh,
such
yeah.
a large laptop.
Yeah.
I started out before the 1.0 version. Yes, now it looks like
I did too.
I don't have to run sudo.
All right, where's the score? Oh my gosh. All right, let's have some more beer.
Thanks a lot, Kenny.
To the 26-yard line. I think Joe Tiller diagrammed that play for someone on the way back. It's a lot of
Hey, Eric, is the feed still running?
No.
We're watching football.
It might be kind of funny, wouldn't it?
Yeah.